My name's Kate. I came to law a very different way. I didn't go originally to law school. I went to the police force. Almost. I visited a few prisons, put it that way. But I started off in the police force, did my law degree, and then transitioned later on as a second career to lawyer. Now, what I'm going to talk to you today about is trust, because you lot asked me to. So that's where we're starting. But I thought we'd have a teddy bear's picnic instead of the traditional PowerPoint. So I'm winning this, not quite sure how it's going to go, but let's just wait and see. So to get the jokes out of the way straight away, we have got the S, which stands for settler. Now there's three components to a trust. The first is the settler, the person that creates the trust and settles assets into the trust, right? So S. Then we've got the trustees. Once the assets have been settled into the trust, those trustees manage the trust going forward, okay? And then we have, I'm going to go with this one first for laughs and giggles, the discretionary beneficiaries. So anyone juvenile want to say anything? Thank you, Michael. Nick would have got in there, but he had a mouthful of chocolate, I think. So we call them discretionary beneficiaries, right? And the reason why they are always discretionary beneficiaries is because they've not got an entitlement to the assets of the trust unless the trustees say they can have something. Right, so this is the closest I could get to a mum and dad trust, all right? So this is mum, this is dad, and they decide that they want to set up a trust. Now, does anybody know the main reasons why somebody would set up a family trust? The legitimate reason why somebody would set up a family trust.
Yourself from a tech on your business, before on your business.
So the legitimate reason for setting up a family trust is to create generational wealth for your family and to pass that down to generations. That's why a trust now lasts for 125 years. However, it does have other benefits, so thanks for that, Rach. And one of those benefits is, and probably the only benefit nowadays, is asset protection, but only if the trust is managed correctly and it's been set up at the right time. There's no point thinking, oh no, I'm getting sued today. I know what I'm going to do is switch all my assets into a family trust, because they'll see straight through that. Right, so what is mum and dad? They're not going to stay up, are they? Please hold Ted. Yeah, he's a drunk Ted. Right, so what has mum and dad got? At the beginning, they might have a few coins, a few bits and bobs, and a cup of tea, and that's what they want to settle in the trust. So a trust deed is set up, and that deed of trust puts in the rules around how the assets will be managed over time. Yeah? And as part of that, in the trust, the settlers are named, the trustees are named, and the discretionary beneficiaries are named, right? And then it tells the trustees how to manage that trust going over time. The settlers also retain certain rights. One of those rights is to appoint trustees, to remove trustees, decide to remove evil beneficiaries, discretionary beneficiaries, or add more as time goes on. Right? So they have an important role, but one of the things that people don't really realise when they set up a trust is you are actually divesting control of your assets when the trust is set up to the trustees. Yeah? Now, this is where it gets a bit complex and people get confused, right? And especially when you've just got a mum and dad trust and they become the settler and the trustees of the trust, right? Because in theory, they've divested their assets to the trust. The trust has settled their assets into the trust, and the trust have ownership. But mum and dad, as settlers and trustees, still have control. So if they've got control, it's very difficult for them to keep the roles separate or throw them on the floor. So it's very difficult to keep the controls separate from the assets, and these two things over time can get merged if the trust is not managed properly. And that is why we get Big Ted involved. Hello, Big Ted. Now, this represents a corporate trustee company. Yeah, often run by lawyers or accountants. Hello, Michael. And they will be independent advisors. Sometimes it's just a personal friend, but they'll be independent advisors, trustee. So there'll be mum and dad who essentially talk to the big boy and say, can we do this? And big boy goes, yes or no. Yeah? But this is the part.
It could be a female voice though.
Pardon?
It could be a female voice though.
I thought I was being
Big
quite.
non-binary.
You're being sus now.
I'm so confused now. I thought it was a
Very
girl
busy,
voice. I
Chris.
thought I was speaking.
Chrissy's being PC.
Oh, yeah. So here we are. These are the decision makers, right, of the trust going forward. And over time, you know, this could be, the idea is to generate wealth for the trust for later on, for generations to come. So over time, what we might have is those little gold coins become a pot of gold dust. Yeah? So the investments that they've made over time, the trustees, have created a big slice of pie to go around. Yeah? And he's very drunk, isn't he? I should have picked a different Teddy. Anyway, so here we have now a pile of assets that have been generated over time, over 125 years maximum. But during that time, you've got, does anyone know who he is?
Sweet.
Sweet. And you've got, pardon?
Orange baby. Yeah.
A grandbaby, that works, yeah. Sorry, that was like,
Yeah, I was like,
and you've got a few other things. Yeah, that are maybe children or grandchildren, and they have been captured as discretionary beneficiaries of the trust.
Gender reassignment.
Now, and of course, our settlers' trustees are also discretionary beneficiaries of the trust. And again, this is why it gets complex, and this is why you probably need good independent advice if you're trying to run a trust and do it legitimately. So here we have the trust, and today, just for today, we've added all you guys in as discretionary beneficiaries.
Because of the cake.
Right.
We're going to get a bit of cake.
Who says you're all going to get a bit of a cake? It's up to these guys to decide who's going to get a slice of the cake, because you're discretionary and you've been a naughty boy, Tony, and you're not having any cake. Okay?
Kate, can I ask a real question instead of
Oh, me,
bullshitting
yeah.
about the banana nut the whole time? So the settlers can actually be discretionary beneficiaries.
Yeah. And so what happens is, in a lot of cases where a trust is attacked to get the money out to give to creditors or an ex-partner or somebody like that, is that the settlers, mum and dad, will also be the trustees and will also be the discretionary beneficiaries, with little else happening in between and no decisions being made by a independent party, and there's no independent oversight. So imagine. Thank you very much. Yes, you took the words right out of my mouth. So, and that's what happens is what we call a sham trust. It's almost saying, I'm giving you the assets, but I'm controlling them, and then I'm going to have them too. So really,
We're trying to take and eat it.
it is, isn't it? Well done. And those are the things that we want to avoid as professional practitioners that manage trusts, right? And of course, I've tried to make it a little bit fun and a little bit of demonstration. But these are the basic parts of a trust and why it needs to be managed properly. It's an entity that requires good management. So going back to that, as I said, we go to the cake, and the chocolate perhaps, you know. Today, Michael might want to buy a house, but he's got and Michael is a discretionary beneficiary of the trust, and he wants to buy a house, but his parents don't like his new partner. So they might say, well, Michael, you are a discretionary beneficiary. The trustees have got together and we've had a chat. We're not going to give you any money, but we will loan you something for a deposit. But we want a loan agreement, so if at any time I need to, or the trust needs to, we can claw that back. Oops, might lose a little bit on the way. That's legal. That was legal fees.
I'm not going to have the bloody point.
That's theft. That's a whole different story. But also, when the Trust Act came in 2019, there were a whole heap of obligations that the trustees had that meant that they had to report better to the beneficiaries about what was happening and how decisions were making. And that's why I would always recommend that you always have an independent trustee on your family trust.
When was that? Sorry, what's the year?
2019, yeah. Just, you might need to double check that, but I'm pretty sure it's Trust Act 2019.
And
So-
how long is the trust? How long before a trust no longer can be called upon as being shared?
It doesn't work like that. It's about how the trust operates and whether you've done the right paperwork and made the right decisions and
But
you've
if you've done
reported
the right
properly.
paperwork and doing the right decisions,
Yeah.
only for 6 months,
Yeah.
they can still have a go with you for the trust
Look, anyone can always have a go at anything.
at
That's
any time.
at any time, but it's about how you've managed it. And let's say you were setting up a risky business and it may or may not be successful, but you weren't sure. The time to set up your trust was either, they say, what's the saying? The best time to plant a forest is 20 years ago, but the next best time is today. So if you are setting up a risky business with some real risk to you, then what I would be saying is at the time you incorporate your company and everything else, you set up your trust and you move the assets because the business is not at risk at that time, but in 10 years' time it might be, and then you've got a legitimate claim that your trust was set up for that intergenerational family wealth growth. So to answer your
But if
question.
they can go after you still after 10 years,
They've
say
got-
you've set it up at the same time you set up a business, thinking that it might fail,
Yeah. So that doesn't matter because it didn't fail, and you never set it up because you thought it might fail. Who goes into business thinking it's going to fail, right?
no, it's just the bad weather and the lawyers do it.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, if anyone ever challenges your trust, having the paperwork done and the decision making and having that 20 years or 5 years or 6 months worth of paperwork and proof that you have made the right decisions and the correct decisions and you've given the consideration to the discretionary beneficiaries will protect you from people claiming that you have set up a sham trust.
It's life insurance. You're preparing for the future, opening up and it does.
Remember, the base concept of having a family trust is to create intergenerational wealth. You want your grandbabies to have wealth that you didn't have. We talk about assets that are appreciating, and those are the assets that we would put into a trust. So that might be a share portfolio or your home or your rentals or the shares in your business. But all of those things are going to appreciate over time, which eventually grandkids and even 100 and 120 years on will benefit from at some point, because a family trust can only go for 125 years, and at that time it has to be distributed to the final beneficiary. But obviously, who's that going to be in 125 years? So if you remember, that is the reason you set up a family trust, and everything else comes as a side benefit. that's your thing. So anyway, shall we get to distributing this cake?
What do you think about those Ross Holmes trusts where the settlor is the trustees as well?
The settlers are usually the trustees as well.
Yeah. The Ross Holmes trusts, you come across that?
I have, and I don't like them. What happened was, in the early 90s, selling a trust became a commodity for a law firm. And so it was like, oh yeah, you need a trust, let me set it up. And then people put them in their top desk drawer and never did anything about them. And so now there's going to be a real industry for people needing to line those trusts up because one, they're a mess. Two, they might not need them. I mean, if you've not got, if you're a mum and dad and all you've got is your family home and you've not got children, then, why would you have a trust except for somebody said it was a really good idea 20 years ago. And now the compliance costs are huge. So now there's going to be an industry for lawyers winding up those trusts.
Some of the people here, the appearance might have mirror trusts. What's your opinion on those?
At the time Mirror Trust were set up, it was because they couldn't set up. It was something to do with the family relationship, property stuff, family law stuff. And the Mirror Trusts were set up to get around something there. I don't know enough about it to tell you off the top of my head, but they're complicated and they're very, very complex. And the only reason I would say retain a Mirror Trust now is if you've actually complied with everything over that period of time, there's no point resettling everything. But ideally, we want one clean, up-to-date trust deed that everybody understands and not assets split over here and assets split over there. Mirror trusts are very complicated and this was supposed to be very basic.
Sorry, I was just giving you the
Yeah.
Yes, final question. Then why did they change the gifting process? Because when we set our trust up in 06, you could only gift like 40,000 a year or something.
So it was 27,000, Michael will probably correct me if I'm wrong, and it was 27,000 from each settlor, and that was to do with gifting tax in New Zealand. If you gave more than 27,000 at any year, as an individual, you got taxed on it. So the regime was to do it yearly at 27,000 per settlor. But now, I think the gifting tax got abolished in about 2013-ish. And so everybody did these super gifts and gifted everything in one go because it didn't benefit anyone. I'm going to put that knife down because no one wants me to put cake with that one then. Right, so so that's the end of the presentation. Hope it was enlightening. And who
Really freaking boring.
Trusts for dummies.
Oh yeah, trust me.
so anybody want a slice of the pie?
Yeah.
Somebody just do it for me. I've got to put my teddies to bed again.
An example.